I'm Christina, 32 female. I live in a quiet, second-floor apartment filled with books and the faint, pleasant smell of aging paper, a hazard of my profession. As an archivist for the city's historical society, my life revolves around preserving the stories of others, carefully piecing together narratives from faded documents and forgotten records. It was a life of quiet order, one I had built for myself and cherished. But the orderly world I knew was about to be shattered by a story I never wanted to uncover, my own. It's a story about a promise made, a promise broken, and how the truest words can sometimes be found long after they were written. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My grandmother, Margaret, was the anchor of my life. While my parents were loving but often preoccupied with their demanding careers, Grandma Margaret was my constant. She was a retired history professor, a woman whose mind was as sharp as a tack and whose heart was immeasurably vast. Her home, a charming Victorian house with a sprawling garden, was my sanctuary. It was where I learned to read, to bake, and to appreciate the weight and wonder of history, both the world's and our own. We had a special bond, one forged over countless cups of tea and long afternoons spent in her study. She would tell me stories of her youth, of the challenges she overcame as a woman in academia, and of the importance of integrity. "Your name and your word are the only two things you truly own, Christina," she'd say, her eyes twinkling. "Guard them fiercely." The house itself was a living museum of our family's history, but it was more than just bricks and mortar. It was the repository of our happiest memories. For as long as I could remember, she had made a promise to me, a vow repeated on birthdays, holidays, and quiet evenings. "This house holds our family's soul," she told me one summer evening as we sat on the porch swing, watching the fireflies dance. I was 16 at the time. "My parents left it to me, and I want it to stay with those who will cherish its spirit. Your cousin Jessica is a good girl, but she sees things in terms of market value. You, my dear, see them in terms of heart value. When I'm gone, I want the estate split evenly between you two. The house will be yours to care for, and Jessica will receive an equivalent share from my savings and investments. It's the only fair way. It's what's right." This promise was never a secret. It was common knowledge within the family. My Aunt Patricia, Jessica's mother, would often make passive-aggressive remarks about it. "It's so wonderful that Margaret has decided to let you be the caretaker of the old place, Christina," she'd say with a tight smile. "Jessica is far too busy with her career to be burdened with such a responsibility." The subtext was always clear. Jessica was ambitious and important, while I was the quiet, sentimental one, fit only for dusting old furniture. Jessica, for her part, never seemed to care much about the house itself, but she cared deeply about fairness, or at least her version of it. "As long as it's a clean 50-50 split, I'm happy," she declared at a family dinner years ago. "I'll just take my half in cash and invest it. An old house is just a money pit anyway." I never argued. I didn't want the house for its monetary value. I wanted it for the memories it held. I wanted to preserve my grandmother's legacy, to keep her garden blooming and her library intact. The financial aspect of the inheritance was secondary. What mattered was the continuation of a story she had entrusted to me. As Grandma Margaret grew older, her health began to decline. The last few years were difficult. She became more frail, and her memory, once a steel trap, began to show cracks. Aunt Patricia, who lived just a town over, took on a more active role in her care. At first, I was grateful. I lived 2 hours away, and my job, while flexible, made daily visits impossible. Patricia assured me she had everything under control. "Don't you worry, Christina," she'd say over the phone. "I'm here to handle all the tedious things, the bills, the doctor's appointments. You just focus on spending quality time with your mother when you visit." My visits became bittersweet. Grandma Margaret would have good days and bad days. On the good days, she was her old self, witty and warm, and we'd talk for hours. On the bad days, she seemed confused and distant, often heavily medicated. During these visits, Aunt Patricia was a constant presence, hovering, managing, and often cutting my time with Margaret short. "She needs her rest," Patricia would insist, ushering me out the door with that same strained smile. I started noticing small changes. New furniture appeared in the living room, sleek and modern, calm. Completely out of character for my grandmother. When I asked about it, Patricia waved it off. "Oh, your grandmother saw it in a catalog and insisted. She said she wanted to brighten the place up." It felt wrong, but questioning it felt like questioning my aunt's care, and by extension, my grandmother's state of mind. The last time I saw Margaret, about a month before she passed, she seemed lucid and anxious. She gripped my hand tightly, her knuckles pale. "Don't ever forget what this house means to us, Christina," she whispered, her voice thin as parchment. "It's for you, to keep our story alive. You remember my promise, don't you?" "Of course, Grandma," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll never forget." "Good," she sighed, a look of relief washing over her tired features. "That's good. Patricia helps with so much paperwork. It gets confusing, but my promise to you is clear." Those were some of the last words she ever spoke to me. A week later, she had a stroke, and she passed away peacefully in her sleep not long after. The grief was a physical weight, a hollow ache in my chest. Amid the sorrow, the memory of her vow was a small comfort, a final gift from the woman who had shaped my world. It was a promise I believed was as solid as the foundation of the house she'd left behind. I had no idea that foundation was about to crumble beneath my feet, revealing a depth of betrayal I could never have imagined. The funeral was a somber affair, a blur of black suits, hushed condolences, and wilting flowers. My grief was a heavy cloak, making it difficult to process anything beyond the immediate pain of loss. Aunt Patricia and Jessica were the very picture of mourning, accepting sympathies with practiced grace. Jessica, dressed in an impeccably tailored black dress, dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue, while her mother managed the proceedings with an air of grim efficiency. I felt disconnected from it all, as if I were watching a play about someone else's family. My only solace was the memory of my grandmother's love and the certainty of her final wishes. 2 weeks later, we were summoned to the office of my grandmother's lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, for the reading of the will. I had never met him before. He was a different lawyer than the one Margaret had used for years, a fact Patricia explained away by saying Margaret's old lawyer had retired and Mr. Henderson's firm had taken over his clients. It seemed plausible enough, so I didn't question it. The office was sterile and impersonal, all polished mahogany and the scent of old paper, a scent that usually comforted me but now felt suffocating. I sat on one side of the large conference table, and Patricia and Jessica sat opposite me. Their composure was unnerving. They looked less like grieving relatives and more like business partners about to close a deal. Mr. Henderson, a stern-looking man with thinning gray hair, cleared his throat and began to read from the document. He started with the usual legal jargon, the formal preamble that felt like a world away from the warm, vibrant woman my grandmother had been. He listed a few small bequests to distant relatives and charities, all of which sounded perfectly in character. My heart rate was steady. I knew what was coming. I was prepared to hear her promise codified in legal terms. Then he reached the main section concerning the estate. Regarding my property located at 45 Elm Street and the entirety of my remaining assets, including all savings, investment portfolios, and personal effects, he read, his voice droning on, I bequeath them in their entirety to my beloved granddaughter, Jessica Vance. The words hung in the airless room. For a moment, I was sure I had misheard. I looked at Mr. Henderson, expecting him to correct himself to say he made a mistake. But he just continued, his expression impassive. The will further states that my other granddaughter, Christina, is to receive a sum of $10,000 as a token of my affection. A token, $10,000. The room tilted. The blood drained from my face and a roaring sound filled my ears. I stared across the table at my aunt and cousin. Jessica was looking down at her hands, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. Aunt Patricia, however, met my gaze directly. Her expression was one of cool, calculated victory. There was no sympathy, no surprise, only the chilling finality of a long-executed plan. "What?" The word came out as a choked whisper. That can't be right. That's not what she wanted." Mr. Henderson looked at me over the top of his glasses. "The will is perfectly clear, Ms. Vance. It was signed and dated 18 months ago. It is legally sound and has been duly witnessed." 18 months ago. That was right around the time Margaret's health had taken a sharp downturn. It was when Patricia had taken over her finances and legal affairs, insisting she was unburdening her ail. Mother, the timing was a punch to the gut. "But she promised me," I stammered, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and rising fury. "She promised both of us for years that the estate would be split. The house was supposed to be for me." Aunt Patricia finally spoke, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Oh, Christina, honey, your grandmother loved you very much, but in her final years she worried. She worried about the upkeep of the house, the taxes. She knew you weren't in a financial position to manage it all. She decided it was best for Jessica, with her business acumen, to handle everything. It was a practical decision, made out of love for you both." Every word was a lie, a carefully crafted dagger. Jessica, the marketing director, who saw the house as a money pit. Me, the archivist, with a stable career and a deep love for the home, suddenly painted as financially irresponsible. It was a narrative so twisted, so insulting, that it left me breathless. "I don't believe you," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "She told me, just a few months ago, she reaffirmed her promise. She said the paperwork was confusing, but her promise was clear." Jessica finally looked up, her expression feigning hurt. "Christina, she was confused a lot near the end. We can't hold her to things she might have said when she wasn't herself. This legal document is what matters. It's what she signed when she was of sound mind." Sound mind. The phrase was a weapon. They were using my grandmother's illness against her, against me, twisting her vulnerability into their justification. They had waited until she was weak, until her memory was failing, and then they had swooped in and convinced her to sign away her true intentions. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I couldn't breathe in that room any longer. "This is wrong," I said, looking directly at Patricia. "You did this. You manipulated her." Patricia's mask of concern dropped, replaced by a flash of pure steel. "You should be careful what you accuse people of, Christina. Your grandmother made her choice. You should be grateful you received anything at all. Now, if you'll excuse us, Jessica and I have a lot to discuss with Mr. Henderson." I walked out of that office in a daze. The city streets seemed loud and hostile. Every smiling face felt like a mockery. The betrayal was a physical poison, seeping into every part of me. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about the complete desecration of my grandmother's memory. They had taken her love for me and twisted it into a footnote, a token of affection. They had stolen her voice, replacing her solemn vow with a cold, legal document that was nothing short of a lie. That night, I sat alone in my quiet apartment, the $10,000 check sitting on my coffee table like an insult. The silence was deafening. I felt utterly defeated, crushed by the weight of their treachery. I had lost my grandmother, and now it felt as if I had lost the truth of her love as well. I had only my memories of her promise, and in the face of a legally binding will, memories were worth nothing. Or so I thought. The weeks following the will reading were a thick, gray fog of grief and anger. The $10,000 check remained on my table, untouched. Every time I looked at it, I felt a fresh wave of nausea. It wasn't a gift. It was a gag order, a pathetic sum meant to buy my silence and validate their lie. Jessica had already started the process of evaluating the estate. Her voice on the phone brisk and businesslike. When she called to inform me, I had 30 days to remove any personal items I had stored at our grandmother's house. "I'm putting the house on the market as soon as possible," she'd said, devoid of any sentiment. "The market is hot right now, and I want to capitalize on that. An appraiser is coming next week." The thought of strangers tramping through Grandma Margaret's home, of Jessica selling it off to the highest bidder, was a violation. That house was a sacred space, and she was treating it like a common asset to be liquidated. I knew I had to go back one last time, not just to collect my old belongings, but to say a proper goodbye to the place that held my heart. I drove up on a Saturday, the sky overcast and matching my mood. The key I had, the one Margaret had given me years ago, still worked. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of lemon polish, old books, and dried roses enveloped me. It smelled like her. But the house already felt different, colder. Jessica and Patricia had been here. Small, expensive-looking vases replaced Margaret's quirky pottery, and a stack of real estate brochures sat on the antique sideboard. They were erasing her before she was even truly gone. My childhood bedroom was exactly as I'd left it on my last visit, a time capsule of my youth. I spent an hour sorting through old books and photographs, each one a painful reminder of what I had lost. The weight of my helplessness was crushing. They had a legal document. I had only memories and a promise they claimed was a symptom of my grandmother's confusion. What could I possibly do? I saved the attic for last. It was our special place, a dusty, magical trove of family history that Margaret had called the memory vault. It was crammed with old trunks, forgotten furniture, and boxes upon boxes of documents she had meticulously saved. As an archivist, I had always loved it up here. Today, it just felt like another room full of ghosts. I was looking for a box of my old college textbooks when my hand brushed against a small, leather-bound trunk tucked away under the eaves. It wasn't one of the big steamer trunks filled with photo albums. This one was smaller, more personal. I didn't remember seeing it before. Curiosity momentarily pierced through my sorrow. I lifted the heavy lid. It wasn't filled with objects, but with paper. It was packed with bundles of letters, tied neatly with faded silk ribbons. On top was a simple, handwritten note in my grandmother's elegant cursive. It read, "For Christina, for when you need to remember." My breath caught in my throat. I sat down on the dusty floorboards and carefully lifted out the first bundle. The letters were from her, addressed to me. The postmarks on the envelopes span decades, from my first year of summer camp to my college graduation. But as I dug deeper, I found another set of bundles, their ribbons a brighter blue. The paper was crisper, the ink newer. I picked up the top letter from one of these newer bundles. The envelope was addressed to me at my current apartment, but it had never been mailed. The date written in the top right corner of the letter was just over a year ago, 6 months after she had supposedly signed the new will. My hands trembled as I unfolded the pages. "My dearest Christina," it began. "It has been a difficult day. Patricia was here with another man, a lawyer I did not recognize. There was so much paperwork to sign regarding my accounts, my health care. She says it's all to make things simpler, to protect me. I trust she means well, but my mind feels so muddled afterward. The pills they give me for my pain leave me in such a fog. Sometimes I struggle to grasp the thread of a conversation. But in the quiet of this evening, my head is clear, and I find myself thinking of you and of our promise. I write this to you now while my thoughts are my own to reaffirm what is in my heart. The house is for you. The estate is to be shared. It is my bedrock wish. Patricia is a good daughter, but she is fiercely protective of Jessica and her future. Sometimes I fear that protection clouds her judgment. She insists this new will is for the best, a modern document to simplify probate. I have signed it because I am too tired to argue, and she assures me it reflects my wishes for an equal split. But I need you to have this, my own words, as a testament. My promise to you has not changed. It will never change." I stared at the letter, the words blurring through my tears. Here it was, a voice from the past, a whisper of truth. She hadn't been confused. She had been manipulated, exhausted, and misled. She had signed their document under the belief that it upheld her original wishes. Frantically, I dug through the trunk. There were more, dozens of them, all addressed to me, all unmailed, all dated within the last 18 months. They were like a secret diary, a chronicle of her declining health and my aunt's increasing control. Another letter, dated 8 months ago. Jessica visited today. She spoke only of the housing market, of how much the property value has increased. She looks at my home and sees only numbers. It breaks my heart. I tried to explain to her what the house means, but I don't think she understands. Patricia told her not to upset me with sentiment. I feel like a prisoner in my own home, my own mind. And another just 4 months before she died. Christina, my love, I hope this letter finds you one day. I am putting them all here in our special place. I feel I can no longer trust the mail. Things seem to go missing. Patricia handles everything now. Today I asked to see a copy of my will, the one the new lawyer prepared. Patricia told me not to worry my head about it, that everything was taken care of exactly as I wanted. But her eyes, they didn't meet mine. I know something is wrong. Please never doubt what I promised you. If there is a dispute, use these words. Let them be my voice when I no longer have one. I sat there in the dusty attic, surrounded by my grandmother's words, the proof of her true intentions. This was more than a collection of letters. This was her testimony. They hadn't just manipulated a confused old woman, they had lied to her, isolated her, and coerced her into signing a document that betrayed her deepest wishes. The grief was still there, a profound AC. But now it was joined by something else, something hot and sharp and clear, rage, and with that rage came a flicker of hope. They had a legal document, yes, but I had the truth, and it was written in my grandmother's own hand. The fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. The trunk of letters sat on the passenger seat beside me, a sacred artifact. The initial shock and elation had subsided, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. My grandmother hadn't just left me letters, she had left me a weapon and a roadmap. Her final words in the last letter, "Let them be my voice," echoed in my mind. I was no longer just a grieving granddaughter. I was the executor of her true will. The moment I got home, I spread the letters out on my dining room table, arranging them chronologically. There were 47 in total, all from the critical 18-month period after the new will was signed. It was a meticulous, heartbreaking record of her cognitive state and the undue influence exerted by my aunt. As an archivist, I knew how to handle documents. I put on a pair of cotton gloves and began to analyze them not just as a granddaughter, but as a professional. I created a timeline. On one side, I listed the dates of the letters. On the other, I started building a corresponding list of events. I cross-referenced the letters with my own calendar, emails, and phone records. A letter dated the day after my birthday mentioned, "Patricia told me you were too busy with work to call." I checked my phone log. I had called that morning. The call went to voicemail. I had left a long, cheerful message. Later that day, Patricia had called me back, saying Margaret was sleeping and shouldn't be disturbed. A small lie, but it was part of a pattern. Isolation. Another letter, written during a week when Margaret was suffering from a bad bout of shingles, described her pain and confusion. "The medication makes the walls seem to breathe," she wrote. Patricia brought more papers to sign today, something about taxes. I signed where she pointed. I hope it was the right thing. I immediately started researching the side effects of her prescription painkillers. Many of them listed confusion, disorientation, and impaired judgment as common side effects. The most damning pieces of evidence were the direct contradictions. The will, signed 18 months ago, was presented by Patricia and Jessica as a clear-headed, practical decision. Yet, in a letter dated only 3 days after the will was signed, Margaret wrote, "Patricia assured me the new legal papers just organize everything the old way, a 50-50 split for you and Jessica. It is a great relief to have it settled." She had been explicitly lied to about the contents of the document she was signing. This was the core of my case. This wasn't just a matter of a changed mind, it was a matter of deception. My grandmother had signed a document under false pretenses while in a vulnerable state. I knew I couldn't do this alone. The family lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was clearly in Patricia's pocket. I needed my own legal counsel, someone who would fight for me and for my grandmother's real legacy. I spent the next 2 days researching the best estate litigation attorneys in the state. I found a woman named Evelyn Reed, a a lawyer in her 50s with a formidable reputation for taking on complex and contentious probate cases. Her website featured testimonials from clients who praised her tenacity and compassion. She seemed perfect. My hands were shaking when I called her office. I managed to get an appointment for the following week. I spent that time preparing obsessively. I scanned every single letter, creating high-resolution digital copies. I organized them into a binder with a detailed timeline, cross-referencing specific statements with medical records I requested from my grandmother's doctor and bank statements Patricia had been forced to share as part of the estate's preliminary disclosures. The bank statements were another goldmine. I noticed a series of large checks written from Margaret's account to a Henderson and Associates law firm in the weeks leading up to the signing of the will. The fees were astronomical for a simple will revision. It smelled of something more complex, something Patricia had paid for with my grandmother's money. Furthermore, there were several large cash withdrawals and a significant check made out directly to Jessica for a down payment on a condo, dated just 2 months after the will was changed. It seemed Jessica had received her inheritance long before our grandmother had even passed. When I finally sat down in Ms. Reed's office, I laid everything out on her conference table: the binder, the timeline, the bank statements, and a copy of the fraudulent will. She listened intently for over an hour, her expression sharp and focused. She read through several of the letters, her brow furrowing with concentration. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on a letter where Margaret had written, "I feel like a ghost in my own life." Finally, she looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion in her professional demeanor. It was a flash of indignation. "Ms. Vance," she began, her voice firm, "what your aunt and cousin have done appears to be a textbook case of undue influence and fraudulent inducement. They isolated your grandmother, took advantage of her medical condition, and deliberately misrepresented the nature of the document she was signing." Hearing the legal terms for their betrayal was validating. It gave a name to the poison. "The letters are extraordinary," she continued, tapping the binder. "In most cases like this, we have to rely on third-party testimony about the deceased's state of mind. It becomes a he said, she said situation. But here, we have the deceased speaking for herself directly and consistently from beyond the grave. This is powerful. This is the paper trail that can win a case." A wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy washed over me. Hope, real and tangible, bloomed in my chest. "So you'll take the case?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ms. Reed gave me a small, determined smile. "Christina, may I call you Christina? I will not only take this case, I will consider it an honor to represent your grandmother. We're going to challenge this will, and we are going to expose what was done to her." We spent the next hour outlining a strategy. The first step was to file a formal will contest with the probate court, which would immediately halt the sale of the house. We would petition for discovery to subpoena more detailed financial records, phone records from Patricia and Jessica, and the deposition of the witnesses who signed the will. "Be prepared, Christina," Ms. Reed warned me as I gathered my things. "This will get ugly. They will try to paint you as a greedy, disgruntled relative. They will try to assassinate your grandmother's character, claiming she was erratic and untrustworthy. They will fight dirty." "I know," I said, clutching the binder to my chest. "But my grandmother was a history professor. She taught me that the truth is always worth fighting for, no matter how deeply it's been buried." As I walked out of her office and into the afternoon sun, I felt taller. The fog of grief had finally lifted, burned away by the fire of purpose. I had my ally, I had my evidence, and I had my grandmother's words to guide me. The paper trail she had so carefully laid was about to lead us straight to justice. The moment Ms. Reed filed the will contest, the fragile peace within our family shattered completely. The legal notice, known as a caveat, landed like a bomb, immediately freezing the estate. Jessica's plans to sell the house were brought to a screeching halt. Her phone call to me was instantaneous and filled with venom. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice stripped of all its usual corporate polish. "How dare you? You're dragging Grandma's name through the mud, all because you're bitter you got cut out. This is pathetic, Christina." I remained calm, just as Ms. Reed had advised. "I'm doing what Grandma wanted, Jessica. The will you had her sign was a lie, and I have the proof." There was a split second of stunned silence on the other end before her mother, Patricia, obviously on speakerphone, took over. "You have nothing," Patricia spat, her voice cold as ice. "You have the ramblings of a sick old woman. We have a legally executed document. The court will laugh you out of the room. You are making a terrible mistake, and you will regret this." The threat hung in the air, but it no longer intimidated me. Their panic was palpable. They were scared, which meant they knew I was right. The discovery process began, and it was as grueling as Ms. Reed had predicted. Their lawyer, Mr. Henderson, employed every stalling tactic imaginable. He filed motion after motion to limit the scope of our subpoenas, claiming our requests for phone records and financial documents were a fishing expedition and an invasion of his client's privacy. Ms. Reed countered every move with precision and relentless legal pressure. She was a master strategist, and bit by bit, the walls they had built around their secrets began to crumble. We deposed the 2 witnesses to the will. One was Patricia's next-door neighbor, an elderly woman who admitted she hadn't actually read the document but simply signed where Patricia told her to. "Patty said it was just some papers for Margaret's care," she testified. "Margaret seemed very tired that day. She didn't say much at all." The second witness was even more telling. He was a junior associate from Mr. Henderson's law firm. He admitted under oath that he had been in the room for less than 5 minutes, had not spoken to my grandmother directly, and was simply instructed by his boss to witness a signature. There was no conversation, no confirmation that Margaret understood what she was signing. This directly contradicted the legal requirement that the testator must declare the document to be their will in the presence of the witnesses. Meanwhile, I dedicated my evenings and weekends to our own investigation, using my skills as an archivist to build our counter-narrative. We received Margaret's detailed medical records, which documented her prescriptions, her diagnoses of mild cognitive impairment, and doctors' notes describing her as easily fatigued and prone to confusion. We cross-referenced these with the timeline of Patricia's increasing control over her finances. The phone records we finally obtained were a smoking gun. They showed a flurry of calls between Patricia, Jessica, and Mr. Henderson's office in the week leading up to the will signing. On the day itself, there were 4 calls between Patricia and Jessica alone. In contrast, my calls to my grandmother's house during that period were consistently short, often lasting less than a minute, or went unanswered, corroborating the letters where Margaret mentioned Patricia intercepting her calls. But the most powerful part of our case remained the letters. Ms. Reed decided we needed to authenticate the handwriting beyond any doubt. We hired a forensic document examiner, a leading expert in the field. I provided him with dozens of samples of my grandmother's handwriting from over the years, old greeting cards, recipes, notes in book margins, along with the 47 letters from the trunk. His conclusion was unequivocal. "The handwriting is consistent and authentic throughout all documents," he stated in his official report. Furthermore, the subtle variations and slight tremor in the later writings are consistent with the subject's documented age and medical conditions, such as arthritis. There is no doubt these letters were written by the same individual who wrote the earlier samples. They are genuine. With every piece of evidence we gathered, the portrait of my aunt and cousin became clearer and uglier. This wasn't a simple case of a last-minute change of heart. This was a calculated, long-term campaign of isolation and manipulation targeting a vulnerable elder. They had systematically cut her off from anyone who might question their narrative, controlled her access to information, and exploited her moments of confusion and ill health to secure her fortune. Our narrative, the one we would present to the court, was no longer just about a broken promise. It was about elder abuse. It was about fraud. Ms. Reed and I worked tirelessly to weave the evidence together into an irrefutable story. We would not only show that the will was invalid due to undue influence, but we would also demonstrate the depth of their deception. The check made out to Jessica for her condo, which they had tried to claim was a gift, we would reframe as an advance on an inheritance she had stolen. As the court date approached, they made one final attempt to intimidate me. Their lawyer sent a settlement offer. They offered to increase my inheritance to $200,000 in exchange for dropping the case and agreeing to a non-disclosure agreement. I showed the offer to Ms. Reed. "It's a significant amount of money, Christina," she said neutrally. "It's my duty to tell you that litigation is always uncertain. This is a guaranteed win." I looked at the offer, then at the copy of my grandmother's letter sitting on the desk. The one where she wrote, "Let them be my voice." $200,000 was life-changing money, but it was also hush money. It was their price for me to betray my grandmother a second time, to let their lies stand as the final word on her life. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Absolutely not. This isn't about the money anymore. It's about the truth. We're going to court." Ms. Reed smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." We were no longer just contesting a will. We were building a fortress of truth, brick by brick, document by document. Our counter-narrative was complete. All that was left was to present it to the world and let a judge and jury see the real story, the one my grandmother had fought so hard, in her quiet, lonely way, to tell. The courtroom was exactly as I'd imagined it, imposing and solemn, with dark wood paneling and an air of heavy consequence. I sat beside Ms. Reed at our table, the binder of letters and evidence resting in front of me like a shield. Across the aisle, Jessica and Aunt Patricia sat with their lawyer, Mr. Henderson. They both refused to look at me. Jessica fidgeted with her designer handbag, while Patricia stared straight ahead, her face a mask of rigid indignation. They radiated an aura of entitlement, as if this whole proceeding was a personal inconvenience rather than a confrontation with their own deceit. The trial lasted 3 days. Their case was presented first. Mr. Henderson argued that Margaret was a strong-willed, intelligent woman who knew exactly what she was doing. He painted her as a modern matriarch who made a pragmatic decision to leave her estate to the granddaughter with more financial savvy. He called Jessica to the stand, where she delivered a tearful, rehearsed performance about her deep love for her grandmother and her desire to honor her final wishes by managing her legacy responsibly. It was nauseatingly convincing to anyone who didn't know the truth. They tried to discredit me, portraying me as the sentimental one, unable to accept that our grandmother had made a choice that didn't favor me. Mr. Henderson even had the audacity to suggest that my discovery of the letters was suspiciously convenient. He implied that I could have fabricated them myself, a desperate attempt to claw back an inheritance I felt entitled to. But their narrative began to unravel under Ms. Reed's cross-examination. She was brilliant. She dismantled Jessica's testimony with a series of quiet, pointed questions. "Ms. Vance," she asked, her tone deceptively gentle, "you testified that you wanted to manage your grandmother's legacy. Is that why you had the house appraised for sale the week after the funeral?" I was just exploring options," Jessica stammered. "And the check for $50,000 your grandmother wrote you for a condo down payment, just weeks after she signed a will leaving you her entire fortune. Did she know she had already designated you as her sole heir when she gave you that gift?" Jessica flushed. "We didn't discuss the will. It wasn't appropriate." Ms. Reed let the implication hang in the air before turning her attention to Patricia. My aunt was a tougher nut to crack. She was poised and defiant on the stand, sticking to her story that she was merely a dutiful daughter helping her aging mother. But Ms. Reed had the phone records, the bank statements, and the testimony from the will's witnesses. "Mrs. Vance, on the day the will was signed, you were with your mother for 6 hours, correct? And during that time, you made 4 phone calls to your daughter, but you claim you never discussed the contents of the will with her." "We were discussing other family matters," Patricia said coolly. "And the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, whose firm you paid over $20,000 from your mother's account. Was it your mother's idea to hire him, or was it yours? Patricia's composure finally cracked. My mother was ill, she needed help, I provided that help. Christina was never there. It's easy for her to swoop in now and make these baseless accusations. Her outburst was exactly what Ms. Reed had been waiting for. It revealed the resentment and possessiveness that had been simmering beneath her calm exterior all along. The turning point, however, came when we presented the letters. Ms. Reed called the forensic document examiner to the stand, who confirmed their authenticity beyond any doubt. Then, instead of just entering them as evidence, Ms. Reed requested permission for a selection of the letters to be read aloud. The judge agreed. An impartial clerk, a woman with a calm, steady voice, was asked to read them. And so, my grandmother's words finally filled the courtroom. The clerk read the letter where Margaret described her confusion after being given medication. She read the one where she explicitly stated that Patricia had assured her the will maintained a 50-50 split. She read the heartbreaking entry where Margaret described feeling like a prisoner in her own home. With each word, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The legal arguments and financial data faded into the background, replaced by the clear, sad voice of a woman who knew she was being betrayed. You could see the jury members leaning in, their expressions turning from neutral curiosity to deep sympathy and dawning anger. I risked a glance at Jessica and Patricia. Jessica was pale, staring at the floor. Patricia's mask had crumbled, revealing a pinched, furious expression. They were being exposed, not by my accusations, but by the very person they had silenced. The final letter read was the most powerful one. If there is a dispute, use these words. Let them be my voice when I no longer have one. When the clerk finished, the courtroom was utterly silent. Ms. Reed's closing argument was masterful. She didn't raise her voice. She simply walked the jury through the evidence, contrasting the story told by the legal documents with the story told by my grandmother's own hand. This case is not about a simple change of mind, she concluded, her voice resonating with conviction. It is about the systematic manipulation of a vulnerable elderly woman. It is about a promise that was cherished, a trust that was broken, and a voice that refused to be extinguished. The defense has a will. We have the truth. We ask you to honor Margaret's true will, the one she expressed not once on a single piece of paper, but 47 times, out of love for both her granddaughters and for what is right. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. When they returned, their verdict was decisive. They found that the will dated 18 months prior was invalid due to undue influence and fraud. They ruled to reinstate my grandmother's previous will, the one that honored her long-standing promise of an equal 50-50 split of the estate. A wave of uncontrollable emotion washed over me. I burst into tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming relief and vindication. Ms. Reed placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. Across the room, Jessica was openly weeping into her hands, while Patricia sat bolt upright, her face ashen with defeat. They had lost. The truth had won. My grandmother's voice had been heard. The aftermath of the verdict was swift and decisive. The court invalidated the fraudulent will and reinstated Margaret's previous one, which clearly stipulated the 50-50 split she had always promised. Jessica was formally removed as the executor, and the court appointed a neutral third-party administrator to oversee the division of the estate. The legal victory was absolute, but the emotional fallout was complex. The relationship with my aunt and cousin was, of course, irrevocably destroyed. There were no apologies, no expressions of remorse. Instead, I received a single, venomous email from Patricia accusing me of destroying the family for money. I deleted it without a reply. There was nothing left to say. They had built their reality on a foundation of lies, and when that foundation crumbled, they had nothing left but bitterness. The court administrator was a fair and efficient woman named Mrs. Davies. She meticulously appraised the entire estate, including the house, savings, and investments. As per the original will's instructions, the total value was to be split down the middle. Jessica's $50,000 gift was officially reclassified as an advance on her inheritance and was deducted from her final share. The most significant part of the will, for me, was the clause concerning the house. It stated that I would be given the first right to inherit the property itself, with its value being counted as the primary component of my half of the estate. The remaining balance of my share would come from the liquid assets. This was my grandmother's final act of ensuring her promise was kept. Jessica, wanting nothing more to do with the situation, demanded her half be paid out in cash as quickly as possible. Within a few months, the legalities were settled. The investment accounts were liquidated, and the funds were transferred. Jessica took her share and disappeared from my life. I heard through the family grapevine that she and her mother moved to a different state not long after, wanting a fresh start away from the whispers and the scandal they had brought upon themselves. I felt no satisfaction in their departure, only a quiet sadness for the family we could have been. One crisp autumn day, Mrs. Davies met me at the house and handed me the keys. This time, they were mine for good. Walking through the front door was a surreal experience. It was no longer a place of potential loss or painful memories, but a place of peace and promise. The ugly, modern furniture that Patricia had brought in was the first thing to go. I spent weeks carefully and lovingly restoring the house to the way my grandmother had kept it, filling it with her spirit. I didn't live there full-time. My apartment and job were in the city, but the house on Elm Street became my sanctuary, a weekend retreat where I could feel close to her. I tended to her garden, organized her library, and sat on the porch swing where she had first told me her unbreakable promise. One of the first things I did was go up to the attic. I bought an archival quality chest and carefully placed all 47 of her letters inside, along with the note she had left on top. For Christina, for when you need to remember. I would never need the letters for a legal battle again, but I would keep them forever. They were a testament to her love, her strength, and her quiet, unyielding fight for the truth. They were the most valuable thing she had left me. The monetary inheritance was significant, and it afforded me a level of financial security I had never imagined. But its true value wasn't in the numbers in my bank account. It was in the freedom it gave me to honor my grandmother's legacy in a meaningful way. With a portion of the funds, I established a scholarship in her name at the university where she had taught history for over 30 years. The Margaret Vance Memorial Scholarship for Women in History would support young female students who, like her, were passionate about uncovering and preserving the stories of the past. At the first award ceremony, I stood before a small crowd of academics and students and spoke about my grandmother. I didn't tell the sordid details of the Wilcont. Instead, I told them about her love for history, her belief in the power of truth, and her unwavering integrity. I told them how she taught me that a person's word was their most sacred possession, and that some promises are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. As I stood there, I felt her presence so strongly, as if she were smiling in the back of the room. I had done it. I had let her voice be heard. Her name would now be associated not with a bitter family dispute, but with education, empowerment, and the pursuit of knowledge, the things she truly valued. Her final wish was honored. The estate was split fairly, the house was safe, and her legacy was not one of deceit, but one of love and integrity. I had fought a painful battle, but in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my inheritance, I had reclaimed the truth of my grandmother's love, ensuring it would echo long into the future.